In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, Ohio, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The year was 1988, and for most residents, it seemed like any other ordinary autumn. The trees were shedding their golden leaves, the air carried a crisp chill, and children could be seen walking to school in their cozy sweaters. But on November 15th, everything changed forever. On that cold Tuesday morning, an entire class of third graders vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and broken hearts. The day had started like any other. At Willow Creek Elementary School, 22 bright-eyed 8-year-olds gathered in Mrs. Anderson's classroom, chatting excitedly about their upcoming field trip to the local history museum. It was supposed to be a fun outing, a chance to see old artifacts, learn about the town's founding, and enjoy lunch with friends. Parents waved goodbye as the yellow school bus pulled away from the curb, carrying not just the students but also 2 teachers and a parent volunteer. None of them would ever return home. At first, no one noticed anything unusual. By late afternoon, however, parents began growing anxious when the bus failed to arrive back at the school. Calls to the museum confirmed that the group had never reached their destination. Panic quickly spread throughout the community as frantic searches began. Volunteers scoured parks, woods, and nearby neighborhoods, while police set up roadblocks and broadcasted alerts across the region. Helicopters buzzed overhead and dive teams searched rivers and lakes, but there was no sign of the missing children or the bus. Days turned into weeks, yet no credible leads emerged. Investigators interviewed everyone involved: the bus drivers, family, school staff, even distant acquaintances. But nothing pointed to foul play or negligence. Security footage from gas stations along potential routes showed no trace of the vehicle. Rumors swirled through the town. Some speculated the bus might have crashed in an inaccessible area. Others whispered about alien abductions or government conspiracies. Each theory brought fleeting hope, only to crumble under scrutiny. Among those, crushed by grief, was Margaret Dawson, whose daughter Emily was among the missing. A single mother who worked long hours at a diner, Margaret had always cherished her time with Emily. They baked cookies together on weekends, read bedtime stories every night, and dreamed of traveling someday. Losing her child felt like losing a part of herself. Every knock on the door sent her heart racing, hoping against hope that it would be Emily coming home. Instead, all she received were condolences and empty promises from officials, assuring her they were doing everything possible. Months passed. The case grew colder, fading from national headlines and becoming little more than a haunting memory for those left behind. Families tried to rebuild their lives, though the void left by their missing loved ones remained unbearable. Support groups formed, where parents shared tears, prayers, and memories of their children. Margaret attended these meetings religiously, clinging to the belief that answers still existed somewhere, waiting to be uncovered. Despite the lack of progress, Margaret refused to let go of her search. She spent countless nights poring over news articles, police reports, and witness statements, searching for anything overlooked. Her tiny apartment became cluttered with boxes of documents, maps, and photographs. Friends urged her to move on, warning that obsessing over the past would consume her. But Margaret couldn't abandon Emily, not when she knew her daughter needed her more than ever. One particularly lonely evening, Margaret decided to clean out her attic, hoping to distract herself from the sadness weighing heavily on her chest. As she sifted through dusty photo albums and forgotten keepsakes, she stumbled upon something unexpected: a faded Polaroid picture tucked inside an old shoebox. The image showed a group of smiling children standing outside the school before boarding the bus. In the background, barely noticeable at first glance, stood a white van parked across the street. Something about the scene struck Margaret as odd. She grabbed her phone and zoomed in on the photograph. That's when she saw it: a man leaning casually against the van, his face partially obscured by shadows. He wasn't looking at the kids. Instead, his gaze appeared fixed directly on the camera, as if aware he was being photographed. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Then, squinting closer, she spotted something else: the edge of a license plate peeking out from beneath. Dirt and grime. Her hands trembled as she realized what this could mean. Desperate to confirm her suspicions, Margaret dug deeper into archived records online. After hours of research, she discovered that a white van matching the description in the photo had been reported stolen weeks before the disappearance. The theft occurred in Cleveland, less than 50 miles from Willow Creek. Could this be the break she'd prayed for? Heart pounding, Margaret knew she had to act fast. This clue, however faint, offered a glimmer of hope after nearly 3 decades of despair. Little did Margaret know this moment would spark a chain reaction, leading to revelations far beyond what anyone imagined. What started as a quiet investigation, driven by maternal love, would soon capture the attention of the entire nation, reigniting interest in a case many thought unsolvable. For now, though, Margaret sat alone in her dimly lit attic, clutching the photograph tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. Somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows of the past, lay the truth about what happened to her daughter, and she vowed to find it, no matter the cost. Margaret Dawson knew she couldn't handle this discovery alone. Clutching the Polaroid photograph in trembling hands, she made a decision that would change everything. Early the next morning, she drove to the local police station, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. She requested to speak with Detective Harris, one of the original investigators who had worked on the case decades ago. Though retired, Harris still lived in Willow Creek, and Margaret hoped his experience might help make sense of what she'd uncovered. When Harris arrived at the station, he was visibly older than Margaret remembered, his once dark hair now streaked with gray, his face lined with years of weariness. But his eyes lit up with curiosity when Margaret handed him the photograph. As he studied it closely, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "I've seen that van before," he murmured, pulling out a dusty folder from the archives. Flipping through pages yellowed with age, he stopped at a report detailing witness accounts from the day of the disappearance. Several people had mentioned spotting a white van near the school around the time the bus departed. At the time, investigators dismissed it as irrelevant. A stolen vehicle sighting wasn't uncommon, but now, with fresh context, it seemed like more than just coincidence. Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples thoughtfully. "This could mean something," he said finally, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. He explained how advancements in technology over the years might allow them to extract clearer details from the image. With renewed determination, he promised Margaret he'd reach out to colleagues still active in law enforcement and push for a re-examination of the case. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, Margaret felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Word of the potential breakthrough spread quickly through Willow Creek. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon, national media began covering it again. The photograph became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even after so many years, justice might still be within reach. Amateur detectives and true crime enthusiasts joined online forums, analyzing every pixel of the image and speculating about its significance. One user claimed to recognize the van from old photographs taken in nearby forests. Another suggested checking abandoned properties where such vehicles might have been hidden. Encouraged by the growing interest, authorities decided to act on these tips. Search teams combed through dense woods and remote areas, following leads, no matter how faint. Then one afternoon they struck gold, or rather rust. Deep in a secluded forest miles outside Willow Creek, they found the skeletal remains of a white van half buried under layers of leaves and vines. Its license plate matched the partial number visible in Margaret's photograph. Though nature had reclaimed much of the vehicle, investigators noticed signs of tampering, scratches on the door locks, shattered windows hastily repaired with duct tape, and odd smudges inside that hinted at human activity. Back at the lab, forensic experts meticulously examined the van for clues. Soil samples collected from the tires revealed traces of dirt unique to the region surrounding Willow Creek, suggesting the vehicle had traveled extensively during the days leading up to the disappearance. Inside, they discovered fragments of fabric caught in the seats, scraps of clothing bearing tags linked to 2 of the missing children. This evidence provided concrete proof that at least some of the students had been transported in the van, answering one of the biggest questions, lingering since 1988. As news of the discovery broke, the nation watched with bated breath. Television specials aired nightly, revisiting the tragedy and exploring new theories about what might have happened. Families of the missing children gathered together, holding vigils and sharing stories of their loved ones. Margaret, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, found herself thrust into the spotlight. Reporters camped outside her home, eager to hear her thoughts on the latest developments. Though grateful for the renewed focus on the case, she remained grounded, refusing to let fame distract her from her ultimate goal, finding closure for Emily and the other children. Meanwhile, detectives expanded their investigation beyond the van itself. They traced its ownership history, discovering it had been stolen from a mechanics shop in Cleveland weeks before the abduction. Among those questioned during the initial theft inquiry was Carl Grady, a reclusive repairman known for his volatile temper and shady dealings. Though never formally charged with the theft, Grady had always been considered a person of interest due to his access to similar vehicles and his refusal to cooperate fully with authorities. Unfortunately, Grady had died in prison years earlier, serving time for unrelated crimes involving child exploitation. Despite his death, investigators dug deeper into Grady's past, uncovering disturbing connections between him and certain individuals present during the field trip. A former neighbor came forward, recalling how Grady often bragged about having a secret project hidden deep in the woods. When pressed for details, the neighbor admitted overhearing conversations between Grady and an unidentified accomplice discussing plans to transport children to a remote location. Though vague, this testimony added another layer of complexity to the case, hinting at a larger operation involving multiple players. As the investigation intensified, Margaret faced her own emotional struggles. Each new revelation brought both relief and anguish, forcing her to confront memories she'd buried long ago. She remembered Emily's infectious laugh, the way she used to twirl in circles until she got dizzy, and the countless promises they'd made to each other about future adventures. Holding on to these moments gave her strength, but it also reminded her of all she'd lost. Nights were the hardest. Sleep eluded her as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if Emily ever thought about her too. To cope, Margaret threw herself into advocacy work, joining forces with other parents affected by the tragedy. Together, they formed a coalition aimed at ensuring justice not just for their children, but for all victims of similar crimes. They organized fundraisers, lobbied lawmakers for increased resources dedicated to cold cases, and partnered with organizations specializing in forensic research. Their efforts gained widespread support, drawing attention from celebrities and influential figures who lent their voices to the cause. Slowly but surely, the movement gained momentum, inspiring others to believe that answers were still possible, even after decades of silence. By the end of this phase, the case had transformed from a forgotten mystery into a national rallying cry. What started as a single mother's desperate search for truth had evolved into a collective fight for justice. Margaret's courage inspired countless others, proving that love and determination could overcome even the darkest tragedies. Yet, despite the progress made, key questions remained unanswered. Who else was involved? Where had the children been taken? And most importantly, what had become of them? For Margaret, the journey was far from over. Every clue unearthed only deepened the mystery, pushing her closer to the edge of despair while simultaneously fueling her resolve. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with twists and turns she couldn't predict. But she also knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop until she found Emily, or at least gave her the peace she deserved. The discovery of the white van in the forest had reignited hope, but it also raised more questions than answers. Investigators worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of evidence while trying to connect the dots between Carl Grady, the stolen vehicle, and the missing children. Meanwhile, Margaret Dawson continued her relentless pursuit of the truth, driven by a mother's love that refused to fade even after 27 years. As forensic teams examined the van further, they uncovered additional clues hidden beneath layers of grime and rust. Bloodstains, though faint and degraded over time, were found on the floor mats and seat cushions. DNA testing confirmed that the samples matched two of the missing children, one being Emily Dawson. For Margaret, this Confirmation was both heartbreaking and empowering. It proved beyond doubt that her daughter had been inside the van, but it also meant she was one step closer to uncovering what happened next. Detectives began retracing the route the van might have taken after leaving Willow Creek. Using soil, samples from the tires, and comparing them with geological data, they identified several possible locations where the abductors could have gone. One area stood out, a dense, isolated forest near the Canadian border, known for its rugged terrain and lack of cell phone reception. Local legends spoke of hunters and drifters using the region as a hideout, making it an ideal spot for someone looking to disappear without a trace. Authorities launched a massive search operation, deploying helicopters, drones, and ground teams equipped with thermal imaging cameras. Volunteers joined the effort, combing through thick underbrush and scaling steep hillsides. Days turned into weeks, and just when morale began to wane, a breakthrough occurred. A volunteer stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin tucked deep within, the woods nearly swallowed by overgrown vegetation. Its windows were boarded up, and the roof sagged under years of neglect, but something about it felt ominous. Inside the cabin, investigators found chilling evidence. The space had been stripped bare save for a few remnants left behind, scraps of clothing, handwritten notes scribbled on torn pieces of paper, and crude drawings etched into the walls. Among the items was a child's backpack bearing the name Emily Dawson stitched onto the tag. Margaret's heart sank when she saw it during a private viewing arranged by detectives. She recognized it instantly. It was the same bag Emily had insisted on carrying that day, filled with snacks and a small stuffed bunny she called Mr. Whiskers. But the most disturbing find came from the basement. Hidden beneath piles of rotting wood and debris, authorities unearthed a series of journals written by some of the older children. These fragile notebooks contained heartbreaking accounts of their ordeal, descriptions of cramped quarters, meager meals, and constant fear. One entry, penned by a boy named Michael, read, "They said we'd never go home. I don't know if anyone is looking for us anymore." Another journal belonged to Emily herself. In shaky handwriting, she wrote about missing her mom and wondering if she still thought about her. Each page was a testament to their resilience, even in unimaginable circumstances. Forensic experts carefully analyzed the journals, extracting fingerprints and traces of DNA to confirm their authenticity. They also studied the dates mentioned in the entries, which suggested the children had survived for several months after their abduction. This revelation shocked everyone involved in the case. How had no one noticed signs of life during all that time? Had the abductors moved them frequently to avoid detection? Or had they simply been too well hidden, lost in the vast wilderness? Public reaction to these discoveries was overwhelming. News outlets broadcast updates around the clock, and social media platforms buzzed with theories and speculations. Armchair detectives dissected every detail, piecing together timelines and pointing fingers at potential suspects. Some accused local officials of incompetence, arguing that the children might have been saved if the investigation had been handled differently back in 1988. Others demanded accountability from federal agencies, questioning why such a large-scale operation hadn't been mounted sooner. Amidst the chaos, Margaret struggled to process everything she was learning. Reading Emily's journal was like hearing her voice again, yet it tore open wounds she thought had healed. She spent hours poring over the pages, imagining her daughter huddled in the cold, writing by candlelight. Each word carried a weight she couldn't bear alone. Friends and family rallied around her, offering support and reminding her that she wasn't facing this nightmare by herself. Investigators shifted their focus to identifying the people responsible for the abduction. While Carl Grady remained a central figure, new evidence pointed to others who may have played a role. Interviews with former associates revealed a network of individuals connected to Grady, including a reclusive man named Harold Finch, who had once owned property near the cabin. Finch had vanished shortly after the disappearance, leaving behind rumors of strange behavior and suspicious visitors. His name appeared repeatedly in witness statements, though he was never formally questioned due to lack of evidence at the time. A breakthrough came when an elderly woman living in a nursing home recognized Harold Finch's description from news reports. She recalled overhearing conversations between him and Grady decades earlier, discussing plans to transport children to a remote location. According to her, Finch had mentioned a safe house somewhere in Canada, accessible only by dirt roads and hidden trails. Though vague, this information provided investigators with a crucial lead. International cooperation became essential as authorities reached out to Canadian law enforcement agencies for assistance. Together, they scoured records of abandoned properties along the border, focusing on areas matching the elderly woman's description. After weeks of searching, they located a cabin eerily similar to the one found in Ohio. Inside, they discovered personal belongings belonging to several of the missing children, including toys, clothing, and photographs. These items confirmed that the abductors had indeed moved the children across state lines, likely to evade capture. For Margaret, each new development brought a mix of emotions: relief at finally finding tangible proof of her daughter's fate, anger at the injustice inflicted upon innocent lives, and sorrow knowing Emily would never come home. Yet amidst the pain, she found solace in the fact that her persistence had led to these discoveries. Her determination had forced the world to pay attention, ensuring that the voices of the missing children would not be silenced. As the investigation pressed forward, attention turned to understanding the full scope of the operation. Was this part of a larger criminal enterprise? Were there other victims waiting to be found? And perhaps most importantly, how many people had known about the atrocities taking place in those secluded cabins? Margaret vowed to keep fighting until every question was answered, no matter how long it took. She owed it to Emily and to all the families still searching for peace. Though the journey ahead promised to be difficult, Margaret held on to one unshakable belief: the truth always finds a way to surface. With each clue uncovered, justice drew nearer, and the memory of the missing children grew stronger. Their stories, once buried in darkness, were now shining brightly, demanding to be heard. And Margaret, standing steadfast in the face of unimaginable loss, became a symbol of hope, not just for herself but for anyone who dared to believe that even the coldest cases could one day be solved. The discovery of the second cabin in Canada marked a turning point in the investigation. It confirmed what many had feared. The abduction of the Willow Creek children was not the work of a single individual, but part of a larger organized operation. The evidence found at the site painted a grim picture. Personal belongings, handwritten notes, and even locks of hair tied with string suggested the abductors had kept meticulous records of their captives. For Margaret Dawson, this revelation deepened her resolve to uncover the full extent of the tragedy that had claimed her daughter Emily, and so many others. Authorities worked tirelessly to piece together the network behind the abductions. Investigators focused on Carl Grady and Harold Finch as central figures, but they soon realized these men were likely pawns in a much darker scheme. Digging into their pasts revealed connections to a shadowy group involved in human trafficking and exploitation. This group operated under the radar, preying on vulnerable communities and exploiting weaknesses in law enforcement systems across state lines. They moved victims frequently, using remote locations like the cabins to avoid detection. The complexity of their operation explained why the case had remained unsolved for nearly 3 decades. Margaret's role in the investigation grew as she became both an advocate and a key witness. Her relentless pursuit of answers inspired others to come forward with information they had previously withheld out of fear or disbelief. One such person was a former neighbor of Harold Finch, who recalled seeing strange vehicles parked near his property late at night. Another was a retired truck driver who admitted transporting supplies to Finch's cabin during the late 1980s, though he claimed ignorance about its true purpose. Each new lead brought investigators closer to unraveling the web of deceit. As details emerged, public outrage reached a fever pitch. Protests erupted outside government buildings, demanding accountability for the failures that allowed such a crime to happen. Families of the missing children joined forces, forming a coalition to push for legislative changes aimed at preventing similar tragedies in the future. They called for increased funding for cold case units, improved training for law enforcement officers, and stricter penalties for those involved in crimes against children. Celebrities and influencers used their platforms to amplify the message. raising awareness and funds to support ongoing efforts. For Margaret, navigating this whirlwind of attention was both empowering and exhausting. On one hand, she felt grateful for the renewed focus on the case. On the other, she struggled to cope with the constant reminders of her loss. Nights were particularly difficult. She often lay awake replaying memories of Emily, the way she giggled when tickled, the serious look on her face while drawing pictures, the warmth of her tiny hand in Margaret's own. These moments were bittersweet, offering comfort, yet intensifying the ache of absence. To channel her emotions into something constructive, Margaret threw herself into advocacy work. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences and meeting with lawmakers to share her story. Her speeches were raw and heartfelt, leaving audiences in tears as she described the pain of losing a child and the frustration of fighting a system seemingly designed to fail families like hers. Yet, through it all, she maintained an unwavering hope that justice would prevail, not just for Emily, but for every child stolen from their loved ones. Back at the investigation headquarters, forensic teams continued analyzing evidence from the cabins. Soil samples collected from the sites revealed traces of chemicals used in cleaning products, suggesting attempts to erase signs of habitation. Bloodstains found on walls and floors matched DNA profiles of several missing children, confirming their presence in both locations. Personal items recovered from the Canadian cabin included a bracelet engraved with the name Michael, a boy whose journal entries had provided critical insights earlier in the case. His parents wept openly when shown the artifact, finding solace in knowing their son had been remembered, even in captivity. One breakthrough came unexpectedly when a team of linguists analyzed the handwritten journals. In addition to documenting daily life in captivity, the children had subtly recorded clues about their surroundings. Phrases like, "the big tree with no leaves," and "the river that sings," hinted at specific landmarks near the cabins. Cross-referencing. These descriptions with satellite imagery and geological maps helped investigators identify additional sites where the abductors might have held victims. Search teams fanned out, scouring forests and abandoned properties for further evidence. Meanwhile, international cooperation intensified as Canadian authorities joined forces with U.S. agencies to track down surviving members of the trafficking ring. Arrest warrants were issued for individuals linked to Grady and Finch, including a woman named Ruth Klein, who had served as Finch's housekeeper before disappearing without a trace. Tips poured in from citizens responding to media appeals, leading to raids on suspected hideouts and arrests of low-level operatives. Slowly but surely, the network began to crumble. Yet despite these victories, questions lingered. What had ultimately happened to the children? Had they been moved again, sold to other criminals or worse? And why had no ransom demands ever surfaced? Margaret wrestled with these uncertainties, torn between hope and despair. She clung to the belief that some answers still existed, buried in the shadows of the past. Every fragment of evidence uncovered strengthened her conviction that closure was within reach. In a dramatic twist, investigators received an anonymous tip pointing them toward a storage facility in Detroit. Inside, they discovered boxes filled with documents, photographs, and audio recordings detailing the inner workings of the trafficking ring. Among the items was a ledger listing names, dates, and amounts of money exchanged, a chilling record of transactions involving dozens of children. Authorities recognized several names from the Willow Creek case, along with others belonging to unrelated disappearances spanning multiple states. This trove of evidence provided the final pieces needed to prosecute those responsible. Arrests followed swiftly, with high-profile trials dominating headlines nationwide. Survivors of the ring came forward to testify, sharing harrowing accounts of abuse and survival. Their courage inspired countless others to break their silence, exposing long-buried secrets and holding perpetrators accountable. For Margaret, the culmination of years of struggle arrived when prosecutors presented her with tangible proof of Emily's fate. Through painstaking analysis of the recovered materials, they determined that Emily had lived for over a year after her abduction, before succumbing to illness exacerbated by poor living conditions. Though the news shattered Margaret, it also brought a measure of peace. Knowing exactly what had happened allowed her to grieve fully and begin healing. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Margaret stood alongside other families, united in their quest for justice. Together, they transformed unimaginable loss into a force for change, ensuring that no parent would ever endure the same nightmare alone. The story of the Willow Creek children became a testament to resilience, reminding the world that even in the darkest times, love and determination could illuminate the path to truth. The trials of those involved in the Willow Creek abduction case gripped the nation. Courtrooms were packed with reporters, families of the victims, and curious citizens eager to witness justice being served. For Margaret Dawson, sitting in the front row day after day, the proceedings felt surreal. After nearly 3 decades of searching, questioning, and fighting, she was finally face to face with the people responsible for stealing her daughter Emily and so many other innocent children away from their families. Each defendant sat stoically as prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence tying them to the crimes. The ledger found in the Detroit storage facility became a centerpiece of the trial, its pages revealing names, dates, and transactions that painted a horrifying picture of exploitation. Survivors of the trafficking ring took the stand, their voices trembling but resolute as they recounted years spent in captivity. One woman described how she had been separated from her younger brother upon arrival at the cabin. Another spoke of enduring months of isolation before being moved to an unknown location. Their testimonies laid bare the cruelty and calculated efficiency of the operation, leaving jurors visibly shaken. Among the accused was Ruth Klein, the former housekeeper who had vanished alongside Harold Finch decades earlier. Now elderly and frail, Klein claimed ignorance, insisting she had simply followed orders without understanding the full scope of what was happening. Her defense attorneys argued that she was a victim too, coerced into compliance by threats against her own family. But prosecutors countered this narrative with surveillance footage showing Klein supervising the transport of children to remote locations. The jury didn't buy her excuses, convicting her along with the others. As verdicts were read aloud, one guilty charge after another, the courtroom erupted in gasps and sobs. Families embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces as decades of pain began to lift. Margaret sat quietly, clutching Emily's journal in her lap. She felt no joy, only a profound sense of relief that the truth had finally come to light. Justice, though long delayed, had arrived, but the legal victories were just one piece of the puzzle. For Margaret and the other families, healing would take much longer. In the weeks following the trial, support groups formed to help survivors and relatives process their trauma. Therapists specializing in grief counseling offered free sessions, while community organizations hosted memorial events honoring the memory of the missing children. A monument was erected in Willow Creek Central Park, featuring plaques engraved with each child's name and a heartfelt message. Never forgotten, forever loved. Margaret threw herself into these efforts, finding purpose in ensuring that her daughter's legacy lived on. She collaborated with artists to design murals depicting scenes from Emily's life, her love of drawing, her bright smile, her dreams of becoming an astronaut. These vibrant images adorned walls throughout the town, serving as reminders of the joy Emily brought to those around her. Margaret also spearheaded initiatives to educate parents and teachers about recognizing signs of danger, hoping to prevent future tragedies. Yet, even as she channeled her energy into advocacy, Margaret couldn't escape moments of raw grief. Nights remained the hardest. Alone in her apartment, surrounded by boxes of old photographs and newspaper clippings, she often replayed memories of Emily in her mind. Sometimes, she'd pull out the Polaroid photograph that started it all, the one with the white van lurking in the background, and stare at it for hours. It symbolized both the beginning of her nightmare and the key to unlocking the truth. One evening, as autumn leaves swirled outside her window, Margaret decided to revisit Emily's journal. She had read it countless times before, but tonight she wanted to focus on something different, the moments of hope embedded within the despair. Flipping through the fragile pages, she noticed entries where Emily wrote about imagining her mom, coming to rescue her. "I know Mommy is looking for me," one passage read. "She won't stop until she finds me." Those words struck Margaret deeply, filling her with pride and heartbreak simultaneously. Emily had believed in her, even when the odds seemed insurmountable, and that faith had carried Margaret through the darkest days. Inspired by this realization, Margaret began writing letters to Emily. At first, they were simple messages sharing updates about her life and expressing how much she missed her. Over time, however, they evolved into reflections on resilience, forgiveness, and the power of love. Writing became therapeutic, allowing Margaret to process emotions she hadn't fully confronted before. Eventually, she compiled the letters into a book titled Letters to Emily, which she self-published and donated to libraries and schools across the country. The project resonated with readers, sparking conversations about loss, healing, and the importance of remembering those we've lost. Meanwhile, investigators continued pursuing leads connected to the trafficking ring. Though most of the key players had been arrested, authorities suspected there might be additional victims still unaccounted for. Forensic teams revisited the cabins and surrounding areas, using advanced technology like ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden graves or burial sites. In one instance, they discovered a shallow grave containing remains identified as belonging to a boy named Jacob, whose disappearance had baffled police for years. His family finally received closure, thanks to Margaret's persistence in keeping the case alive. Public interest in the Willow Creek tragedy remained high, inspiring documentaries, books, and even a feature film based on Margaret's story. Filmmakers approached her with offers to adapt Letters to Emily into a screenplay, but she declined unless she retained creative control. "This isn't just my story, it belongs to every family who has ever lost someone they love," she told them firmly. When the movie premiered, it earned critical acclaim for its sensitive portrayal of grief and determination. Audiences left. Theaters moved to tears, vowing to cherish their loved ones more deeply. Despite the accolades, Margaret remained humble. She refused to see herself as a hero, insisting that she had simply done what any parent would do. "I didn't fight for recognition," she said during an interview. "I fought because I owed it to Emily, to give her a voice when she couldn't speak for herself." Her words resonated with millions, inspiring others to advocate for change in their own communities. By now, Margaret's efforts had sparked a nationwide movement. Parents, educators, and lawmakers joined forces to strengthen protections for children and improve resources for solving cold cases. New legislation, nicknamed Emily's Law, allocated federal funding to train law enforcement officers in handling missing persons investigations. Volunteer networks sprang up, connecting amateur sleuths with families seeking answers. Even tech companies got involved, developing apps designed to crowdsource information and alert communities about potential threats. Through it all, Margaret remained steadfast in her mission. She attended conferences, gave speeches, and mentored grieving parents navigating similar journeys. Her message was always the same: never give up. No matter how impossible the odds may seem, perseverance can lead to breakthroughs. And sometimes the smallest clue, a faded photograph, a handwritten note, or a whispered confession, can shine a light in the darkest corners of history. As years passed, Margaret's hair turned silver and lines etched deeper into her face. Yet her spirit remained unbroken. On quiet evenings, she'd sit by the window watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. She imagined Emily somewhere beyond the horizon, safe and at peace. Though the ache of loss never fully disappeared, it softened over time, replaced by gratitude for the lessons Emily had taught her about courage, love, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Margaret knew the road ahead would still hold challenges. Not every question had been answered, not every victim recovered. But she also knew that the fight for justice wasn't hers alone anymore. It belonged to everyone touched by the tragedy of the Willow Creek children. Together, they had transformed unimaginable pain into a beacon of hope, proving that even in the face of unthinkable evil, good could triumph. And for Margaret, that knowledge was enough to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Years passed since the trials of those involved in the Willow Creek abduction case, but the impact of Margaret Dawson's relentless pursuit of justice continued to ripple across the nation. What began as a personal quest for answers had evolved into a movement that changed laws, saved lives, and inspired countless others to confront their own battles with courage and determination. For Margaret, the journey was far from easy, but it became a testament to the power of love, a mother's unwavering devotion to her child. As time went on, Margaret found solace in small, meaningful ways. She planted a garden in Emily's memory, filling it with sunflowers, the flower Emily had loved most because they always looked happy. Each bloom reminded her of her daughter's laughter and bright spirit. On weekends, she invited local children to visit the garden, sharing stories about Emily and teaching them how to care for plants. The garden became a place of healing, not just for Margaret, but for anyone who needed a moment of peace. Her advocacy work expanded beyond Willow Creek, reaching communities nationwide. Margaret traveled extensively, speaking at schools, police, academies, and conferences about the importance of vigilance and compassion when dealing with missing persons cases. She emphasized the need for collaboration between law enforcement, families, and volunteers, urging everyone to view each case as if it were their own. Her speeches resonated deeply, often bringing audiences to tears while igniting a fire within them to take action. One of Margaret's proudest achievements was the establishment of the Emily Dawson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of missing children and funding research into advanced forensic techniques. The foundation also provided grants to develop technology aimed at preventing abductions, such as GPS-enabled bracelets for at-risk youth and AI tools capable of analyzing patterns in cold cases. Through partnerships with tech companies and universities, the foundation pushed boundaries, ensuring that no stone was left unturned in the search for truth. Margaret's efforts didn't go unnoticed. In 2025, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. Standing on stage beside the president, she accepted the award not for herself, but for all the parents who had fought and were still fighting for justice. "This medal belongs to every family who has ever refused to let their loved ones be forgotten," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of emotion. "It is a reminder that hope endures, even in the darkest times." The recognition brought renewed attention to unsolved cases across the country. Inspired by Margaret's story, thousands of people joined volunteer networks, offering their skills to help solve mysteries that had lingered for years. Cold cases once deemed hopeless suddenly gained traction as fresh eyes examined old evidence. Families separated by tragedy came together, united by shared pain and purpose. Many credited Margaret with reigniting their belief that answers were still possible, even after decades of silence. For Margaret, though, the greatest reward wasn't fame or accolades. It was knowing that her fight had made a difference. One day, while attending a fundraising gala hosted by the foundation, she met a young woman named Sarah, who approached her hesitantly. "I don't know if you remember me," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "But my brother Michael, he wrote one of the journals you found in the cabin." Margaret recognized her immediately. Michael's journal had been instrumental in identifying key locations tied to the trafficking ring. Sarah explained how her family had struggled for years, haunted by unanswered questions about what happened to Michael. Thanks to Margaret's persistence, they finally received closure. "You gave us back our son," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Even though he's gone, we know now that he mattered, that his life meant something." The two women embraced, holding on to each other as waves of grief and gratitude washed over them. Moments like these reminded Margaret why she had never stopped fighting. Despite the progress made, challenges remained. Not every victim of the trafficking ring had been identified, and some families continued to wait for answers. Investigators worked tirelessly, following new leads and employing cutting-edge methods to uncover hidden truths. Advances in DNA testing allowed scientists to match unidentified remains with missing persons records, providing closure to families who had waited decades. Margaret stayed involved, attending briefings and offering guidance whenever needed. She knew the work would never truly be finished, but she also knew that every step forward counted. On quiet evenings, Margaret often reflected on how far she'd come. From the lonely days spent poring over dusty files in her attic to standing before crowds advocating for change, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Yet, through it all, one constant remained: her love for Emily. She kept a photo of her daughter on the mantel, surrounded by candles and keepsakes. Sometimes she'd sit there for hours talking to Emily as if she were still present. "I miss you so much," she'd whisper, "but I promise I'll keep telling your story. You'll never be forgotten." Margaret also grew closer to the families of the other missing children, forming bonds that transcended shared loss. Together they celebrated milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, as a way of honoring their loved ones. They organized annual memorial events, inviting the community to join them in remembering the joy these children had brought into the world. These gatherings became moments of connection and healing, reminding everyone that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, love endured. In 2030, Margaret decided it was time to write another book. This one would focus not just on her own journey, but on the stories of resilience she had witnessed along the way. Titled Hope Among the Ruins, it chronicled the experiences of families who had turned grief into action, creating legacies of hope and change. The book became an instant bestseller, praised for its raw honesty and uplifting message. Readers wrote letters thanking Margaret for giving them strength during their darkest hours. "Your words remind me that I'm not alone," one note read. "Thank you for showing me that light can shine even in the deepest shadows." As Margaret aged, she slowed down physically but remained sharp and determined. She moved into a cozy house near the garden she had built, spending her days tending to flowers and mentoring young activists eager to carry on her legacy. Though she missed Emily every single day, she took comfort in knowing that her daughter's life had inspired positive change. "Emily may not be here with me," she often said, "but she's everywhere. In the smiles of children, in the strength of families, in the hearts of strangers touched by her story." When Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, the entire nation mourned her loss. Tributes poured in from world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens whose lives she had impacted. Her funeral drew thousands, many carrying sunflowers in honor of Emily. As friends and family gathered to celebrate her life, they remembered her not as a victim of tragedy, but as a beacon of hope, a woman who refused to let despair define her. Today, Margaret's legacy lives on. The Emily Dawson Foundation continues its vital work, helping families find answers and preventing future tragedies. Schools teach students about her story, using it as an example of perseverance and compassion. And in Willow Creek, the garden, she planted blooms year after year, a living tribute to a mother's love and a daughter's memory. Though the wounds of the past will never fully heal, Margaret proved that love and determination can overcome even the darkest chapters of history. Her journey reminds us all that no matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, we have the power to create change, to turn pain into purpose and loss into legacy. And perhaps most importantly, she showed us that even in the face of unimaginable heartbreak, hope endures, because love never forgets.